Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this panel titled From Safety to Security, Governing Adversarial Use of AI. I am Océane Herrero. I am a journalist for Politico. I cover tech in Paris. And I will be moderating this discussion, so thank you again. Over the past few years, we've observed a dense international conversation around AI governance and AI risks. As part of this conversation, we kind of focus on AI safety, meaning unintended consequences from the systems. But another one is kind of growing right now, which is AI security, so the malicious uses of AI. From cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns to the potential development of chemical, biological, or nuclear threats, the misuse of AI by hostile actors is no longer a distant scenario. It's becoming a pressing concern. We are now facing complex questions, which are how do we govern these uses of AI? Will it be at the cost of innovation? What are the legal frameworks, technical safeguards, and international collaborations that we need? Today, we are fortunate to be joined by a distinguished panel of experts to dive into this conversation. So thank you all for being here. Welcome, Nicolas Butts. You are Director of AI and Cybersecurity Policy at Microsoft. Thank you, Yoshua Bengio. You are a professor at the University of Montreal and co-president and scientific director at LawZero. You're also one of the laureates of the Turing Award. Thank you, Jacinda Ardern. You're a former Prime Minister of New Zealand and also the patron of the Christchurch Call. Thank you, Robin Gies. You're the director of the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research. And to finish, we have Vilas Dar. You're the president of the Patrick G. McGovern Foundation, a philanthropic organization that focuses on AI and its social impact. Let's begin with a round of contributions from our speakers. I will start with Yoshua Bengio. You chair the International Report on AI Safety, so I'll let you open the conversation on the threats that you identify.
Speak to you all, sorry, not realizing. So I want to say a few words about this international report that I've been chairing. It came out of the Bletchley AI Summit in 23, brings together 30 countries, the EU, the OECD, the UN. It's the first of its kind international report that is setting up to inform policymakers with the scientific literature, the scientific results on AI, and specifically what touches the impact of AI in society, the AI risks. There's about 100 experts from around the world that are working on this. We had a first report last February at the Paris Summit, and there will be a new one presented for the India Summit. And the report touches on a lot of the harms, but focuses on those that come out of these larger frontier systems. It talks about harm to individuals through fake content, so deepfakes, fraud. It talks about manipulation of public opinion. AI makes it easier to generate, as you know already, a lot of persuasive content at an unprecedented scale. One thing that is coming up is, at least on the radar screen of scientists, is not just mass dissemination of content, but also individualized persuasion that there is being studied in labs, at least. Of course, there's the issue of cyber that we'll talk more about. What's going on there is, for now, what happens is it just makes it easier for actors who don't have the sufficient expertise to do bad things, so lowering the barrier for malicious actors. Then an issue that is of great concern to national security agencies around the world is biological and chemical attacks. Again, for now, it's mostly a tool that can help people without the right level of expertise, so it's just going to make it easier. And until recently, it wasn't clear whether it would make it easier for malicious actors than them having access to the internet, but more recent studies shows that actually it does. So because things are moving very quickly, the organizers of the report have decided to put out regular updates during the year. We just put out one a few weeks ago that highlights the advances in these general purpose AI systems thanks to reasoning. This has been the biggest change in the technology over the last year, leading to breakthroughs in the competence of these systems in science, in mathematics, for example, winning gold medal level competitions, in software engineering, programming, and the other big thing that has happened this year, of course, is the advances in the autonomous abilities, agency of these systems, because there's, of course, a lot of money to be made by automating people's jobs away. And that's going to continue. I think we're just at the beginning of this. We're seeing data showing the planning capabilities, the ability to do more and more complex and longer tasks is growing exponentially fast. So on cyber and other aspects, I think one thing that the report makes very clear is that currently we don't have good defenses. Jailbreaks still work. We don't have the right incentives on companies to work on solutions. And there are many more challenges coming ahead. One of them I'd like to say a few words about is the real possibility of excessive concentration of power in the hands of a few companies and a few countries, which raises all kinds of questions about governance, both inside companies, but also between countries, raises questions about democracy, checks and balances, economic and political domination. So I'd love to continue that discussion with everyone in this panel. Thank you.
To go a bit deeper on the cyber threats, Nicolas Butts, it's something, of course, that you observe. Can you help us identify like how AI intervene in that field?
Sure, very happy to, and hope everyone can hear me good. Pleasure to be with everyone. Thanks, Joshua. I just want to build on that point around cyber. So we are certainly seeing threat actors, unfortunately, experimenting with weaponizing AI. AI is having transformative benefits, positive benefits to society, but unfortunately, attackers also know this. It's very easy for us to identify that. We've published a report recently, a couple weeks ago, a Microsoft Digital Defense Report. It's our annual sort of threat landscape across the board, and it builds on the enormous amount of signals that we see. So Microsoft, every day we have access to 100 trillion telemetry signals. On every given day, just today, we have scanned and blocked more than 5 billion emails for malware and for phishing. So we see this across the board. But it's not just us. MIT published a report a couple weeks ago, highlighted ransomware attacks are now 80% generated by or supported by AI. And we see this across the board. So just a couple of examples here. But before that, I kind of just want to make it real for everyone. How many in this room are using AI now for your work? Raise your hand. How many are using it for research? Raise your hand. How many for writing? Any builders? How many are using it to generate code? Okay, so a couple. Same thing for bad guys. So we see threat actors using AI for reconnaissance. In our report, we have the Microsoft Threat Analysis Center highlights. We've seen a 5x increase in information operation samples from nation-state actors between January 24 and June 25. 5x increase in use of AI to do things like digital cloning of media personalities, improved information operations targeted around conflict. So that's one example. Reconnaissance research like everyone else. The second is writing. Unfortunately, threat actors are using AI to make spear phishing, ransomware attacks, identity theft more effective and at higher scale. So we've actually seen in our report that when threat actors use AI for ransomware, it's 4.5 times more effective. The normal click-through rate for when someone sends a phishing email is 12%. With AI, it's all of a sudden 54%. And we see it also with AI identity theft. It's up 200% year on year. People are using AI to create fake identities to then get access to the system. And then finally on malware and writing code, the same thing. The same thing. We're not seeing as much use of AI yet to create really sophisticated malware, but the reason is not what you think. It is not because the technology is not there. It is not because the threat actors, whether it's cybercriminal or nation-state actors, don't want to use it. It is because good old traditional cybercriminal attacks with less sophisticated access points, unfortunately work. We highlight in the report 60% of all breaches are still through things like exposed web servers, people using password for password and gaining access to it. So for us, we see certainly AI enabling threat actors, but we also are reminded that we need to make sure to get the basic cybersecurity bits right too. And then finally, I will just say, just as everyone here in this room shared how you're using AI, the same thing for threat actors. This is why it's so critical that we focus on people. We make sure we commit to build capacity, build skills with people around both security and AI, and particularly in law enforcement, and particularly in national security organizations. AI security is a national security issue. And we need to make sure not just that we get new technologies in the hand of defenders to address it, but also that governance follow along. And that's why it's so important that we have conversations between industry, certainly, and the big players, but also governments and civil society. Ultimately, governments need to regulate it, but civil society usually represents the victims of these attacks.
Thank you for all these elements. That's a lot of things that we will be able to unpack in this conversation. Jacinda Arden, you work on the proliferation of violent content.
Not
Yoshua
personally. I personally don't work on the proliferation of violent content.
Do you see AI as a new form of threat in this area, and or do democracies have any antibody against those types of content, in your opinion?
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to join this esteemed panel today. I can make a lot of assumptions about why I'm a member of this panel, but my primary one is I assume is the patron of the Christchurch call to action, which I think is both a symbol of the opportunity, and I think the best way forward around governance in the regulatory space for AI. It is also a warning. It is also a pathway to solutions. On the warning, the Christchurch call to action exists because on the 15th of March 2019, a white supremacist opened fire in 2 mosques in New Zealand and took the lives of 51 people. And when he did so, he live streamed that attack for 17 minutes, and it became clear on that day and in that moment that the protections that were required to prevent such a heinous act were not in place. And of course, from research, we know that someone who engages in a violent extremist act does so firstly for some kind of revenge, they secondly do it for infamy, and they thirdly do it for reaction. And platforms at that time, and to a certain extent still are, enablers for so many of those elements of terrorism and violent extremism. So the Christchurch call was created because we recognised that the New Zealand government alone did not have the regulatory tools necessary to be able to prevent that kind of action happening again. And as a result, we created a call which now has over 130 member organisations, so civil society, sitting alongside government, sitting alongside tech companies, each with their own responsibilities. Government needs to regulate where required. Tech companies need to take responsibility for their terms of service and their content moderation, but all of us working together on solutions. As a result of that work, we have a crisis response protocol to these types of actions that did not exist then. And you have not seen the kind of act like the Christchurch call, Christchurch, where that video was uploaded once a minute, once a second for the first 24 hours after that attack on YouTube. Secondly, we have some really incredibly important tools that have now been developed. One of the things we became aware of is our terrorists self-identified as having been radicalized on YouTube. Now, we know AI is both a preventative tool, potentially, but also could well exacerbate some of those pathways to radicalization. So after many years of working with the tech companies who raise proprietary issues and privacy issues, we've created, in conjunction with Open Mind and with funding from the likes of Microsoft, we've created a Christchurch Call initiative on algorithmic outcomes, which will allow accredited researchers to be able to follow the algorithmic journey of individual users so that we can better understand those pathways to radicalization and the off-ramps. We know that this tool will also be potentially useful, potentially harmful, depending on who can access it. So we're putting in ethical parameters now. So we are therefore a demonstration point of what happens if you do not build guardrails from the outset, because retrofitting guardrails, as we are attempting to do now, is incredibly difficult. So we are a warning, but also an example of what can be created when we work collaboratively together. The final thought, though, that I'd add is that we exist because of crisis, but also consensus. We were all able to agree, even on the issue of, for instance, information integrity, that there was a role for us all to play when the outcome was trying to prevent violent extremism and terrorism. Because it's pretty easy to get everyone to agree that that is a bad thing. But we also exist because of crisis. How do we build the consensus around what the guardrails for AI look like without crisis? Because my concern is, at the moment, we're leaning very heavily into the commercial imperatives. At the moment, you don't see government stepping in where they otherwise might, lest they be seen to be holding back the innovation of their own domestic companies in the race to be the first and to have market dominance. So the imperatives that would usually exist to put pressure on companies to take into account safety and humanity aren't there where they would usually be. So we need a coalition for humanity that does include states who are concerned by these issues, alongside companies who are concerned by these issues, and technologists and civil society. It's the model we have, it's the model I advocate for.
Robin Gates, you work on a very different range of topics, but very important too, which are the making of biological nuclear weapons. Can you explain the role of AI in that field and in the making of those threats?
Sure, happy to do that, and happy to be back in Paris and to be on this esteemed panel. Yeah, I mean, my biggest concern is probably a statement of fact that machine warfare is coming. And machine warfare coming has various facets. One aspect is that increasingly weapon systems are becoming autonomous. And that is a trend that is, you can see it all around the world. You can see it in the war in Ukraine. It is driven by everyday battlefield pressures. Currently, there's remote control drones. But of course, as long as there's a radio link, they are remote controlled. You can hack that link. You can disrupt it, all sorts of interference. Currently, they're operating with fiberglass cables, like with kites. It's a very anachronistic way to do it. It's an interim step to more and more autonomy, so they can fly at night. The radio link cannot be disrupted. So this is coming. It's a concerning trend, because currently we don't really see where any form of self-constraint in this arms race would come from. That's one. The other concern that we really have at the United Nations is that with artificial intelligence coming into military decision-making more and more, the pace of battle will increase. The complexity of the data, the pace of decision necessities, and they crowd out human decision-making, because that would slow it all down. And here again, the question really is, where would some notion of constraint come from in a very contentious geopolitical environment where there's almost zero trust among the big geopolitical players? And then thirdly, the weapons of mass destruction question that you had asked. I mean, it would be a terrible concern, of course, if artificial intelligence was to be integrated into nuclear command and control structures. I don't think anyone can have an appetite to go there. And there have been a lot of statements from nuclear weapon states that they don't want to go there. But what I do see is that in a more hidden way, artificial intelligence will creep into all sorts of decision-making, will support the military in many, many ways. And so silently, it is creeping in. And again, the question is, where is the momentum coming from that we put in some sort of barrier that we don't go there? The last point I would make is maybe on biological weapons. There too is a concern that with large language models now openly available, the entry level could become lower for people, malicious actors, to develop chemical toxins or biological pathogens. I think that's not exactly up on us yet. It is a scenario that we need to take serious. And like Jacinda was just saying, if we could start to be proactive and act on this now, go beyond just awareness raising on this challenge and really think, what is it that we could do to meet this challenge? From our vantage point at the UN, I would say a systematic approach to watch over these technological challenges, meeting other types of weapon challenges. That's currently not there. It's very ad hoc. We do it in a zillion different fora, but we're kind of missing the bird's eye perspective and probably some of the bigger trends.
Thank you for all these elements. I'm passing the microphone to Vilas Dar. We see also in this conversation the rise of the question on open source, open weight models, and whether or not they might amplify those threats by making AI more accessible to actors with bad intentions, let's say. What do you think of this debate? Do you think it's a question that we should raise?
Thanks, Océane. That's better. I have to tell you, I have some really amazing nieces and nephews. They're beautiful kids, they're really smart, they're curious about the world. And when they were young, sometimes they'd have trouble sleeping. They'd come and tug on my shirt, and they'd say, "Can you come help?" And I'd say, "What's the problem?" And they said, "There's monsters under the bed." I'm sure there's a much more eloquent way to say that in French, but it's a common American trope, right? And we'd spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to get them to sleep, and we'd do two things. The first thing I learned was the best thing you could do was to name the monsters. You had to give them big fluffy tails and floppy ears. You had to make them seem as ridiculous as possible. But you also had to acknowledge that this was a real emotional moment for these kids. They were scared and they couldn't go to sleep. And the second is you had to come up with heroes to take care of those monsters. You had to come up with cops and superheroes and everything else. I'm thinking a lot about that as I sit on this panel, as we think about a broader conversation about AI safety. We've been in a conversation about all the monsters under the bed, all the ways that the model will do something to hurt us. For whatever reason, we've decided that the technology is the problem, that it's the data, it's the bias, it's the algorithms, it's the new capacities that are emerging. But I think we know that the real monsters here aren't technical ones, they're socio-technical ones. Jacinda has given us the frame. These technologies, when they're used by people, create challenges that are much more material and much more scary than what the technologies themselves do. So the conversation about AI safety can't exclusively be a technology one. It has to be one about what institutions we build and whether they're actually responsible for and can support a meaningful response. So that debate comes to the fore all the time around open source, right? We hear all of these scary possibilities of what might happen if we open source the greatest innovations of human history. We hear about distributed risks. We hear about the chance that somebody might use them for bioweapons, for terrorism, but we don't ever dig down to ask the more fundamental question. If open source is all of the things we've talked about, an irreversible possibility that somebody might create something and give it to the world in a way that might create harm, something that can never be put back under control, the reaction can't be the typical human emotional response to say, lock it down, put it in a compliance framework, build voluntary models for private sector companies and how they'll use them. We have to expand to a bigger frame. We have to think about what our new superheroes might be. And to me, that's the institutions of civil society that guide how these tools can be used, that create frameworks of accountability and responsibility, that create ways to monitor the incidents of what are happening and be able to advise and structure policy at scale. That the debate is not really about open source versus closed source or the dangers of open weight models. They're about whether we have the capacity to innovate our social institutions at the same rate that we're innovating our technologies. I'll make this quite concrete. I'm going to give you a few examples, right? Here in Paris, we've worked with the OECD to build the first AI incidents monitor. It's an observatory that you can go online, and we can begin to track the effects of what's happening with open source, adversarial use of AI and cybersecurity across a number of other domains in near real time. With the United Nations, as a part of the high-level advisory body, I called for the creation of an international scientific panel, which is now being constituted. A multi-sectoral dialogue that brings together the private sector and the public, that brings together institutions, technologists, folks who are at the forefront of understanding technological safety, but also understand the human impacts of the tools we build. At the end of the day, we can talk about whether the technologies are safe or not as long as we want. But if we want to have a comforting night's sleep, we have to know that there's somebody out there who's actually taking care of our common human interests, that are addressing issues like violent terrorism and extremism online, not merely as a consortium of incredibly powerful civil society organizations, but as a part of a social mandate that says that AI safety is more about safety than it is about AI. It's more about human institutions than it is about lines of code. And I think that's the possibility that's emerging in the public debate.
All of you emphasized the need to make a discussion happen between the public and the private sector. Are you satisfied by the way this conversation has been led so far? And what would be the right framework to go further in, you said it, a more and more confrontational word in the world of AI? Maybe Yoshua, if you want to begin.
Yeah, unfortunately, I and many other commenters of what's going on see many signs of unhealthy competition between the corporations working on AI, developing AI, and also between countries that are trying to compete against each other using AI. And this race for domination, this is what it really is dangerous in so many ways. It's dangerous technically because it means there's going to be an incentive to cut corners. A lot of the risks, the impacts on society, from an economic perspective, there are externalities, right? They are borne by everyone. And so the incentive system for companies to do the right thing are not well aligned. I mean, maybe large companies have a better incentive because they go for the longer term. But if you're especially wearing a more cowboy hat, like many CEOs, you might choose to take risks that are going to involve everyone else. And so I think we have to rethink the idea that it has to be market-driven and geopolitical competition. We have to maybe bring governments more into the fray of how we're going to develop AI. It's not just regulation. It's also investing in the technologies that can help us mitigate the risks. And we also have to think about international agreements. Because AI is not limited by national boundaries. I mean, bad actors in one country using an AI that they have stolen or copied, because it was open weight models, can do harm in yet a third country, right? So it can't be something that single country national regulation solves. Although harmonizing these regulations is also something that will be very important in that respect.
Nicolas, is there an incentive for private companies to lower safeguards in order to stay in the innovation race? And how do governance can help to solve this potential issue?
I think there is for the companies that want to do the right thing, and like Microsoft recognized that, like, at the end of the day, our business is built on trust. And so I agree with Yoshua, though, that we need to do more to make sure that we incentivize it, to do more to encourage transparency. And let me give you a very specific example that relates to cyber. So as part of, last time we had this discussion in Paris in the Action Summit earlier this year, Microsoft released our Frontier Governance Framework. It is our framework for how we governance the release of frontier AI systems. What are some of the high-risk capabilities, many that have already been mentioned today, that we measure for, that we evaluate, and we test pre-deployment to make sure that we don't release anything that potentially could have devastating risks. The challenge specifically on offensive cybersecurity, for example, is the people that are building the systems, they are not national security experts. They don't necessarily understand the complexity, the scale, and the threat landscape of how a terrorist organization, nation-state actors could misuse the systems that they're trying to build. And so when we build our threat models, how do we test it? How do we make sure that the testing is realistic and it represents the risk? And that's where we need the conversation with governments. We need to have a conversation with national security agencies, with law enforcement, to understand the threat, so that when we build those systems, we can build better systems on it. That's the first point. The second point in terms of public-private partnerships, particularly for this, is I agree with Jacinda. I think we had a failure of the last generation of technology where we didn't get the guardrails right up front, and I think we are, frankly, all suffering for it at the moment to try to retroactively do that. We are trying to do it for AI to get it better. I don't think it is perfect, but we're trying to get it better by doing this upfront early. Because if we don't do it early, we're going to have to retroactively again unwangle this. And frankly, the experience from last generation of technology has been too tough on this, and we've seen the devastating results on it. And this is where we need governments. If we don't understand how governments plan to regulate or evaluate some of these things, and if we don't have harmonized regulations, we spend all our time providing 40 or 50 different reports on transparency. The companies that understand trust try to do their best, and the ones that don't, they gloss over it. And so that's why we need as much harmonized rules as we can and as much incentives around doing good. I'm neither a CEO, I don't look good in a cowboy hat, but I will tell you from a Microsoft perspective, we're certainly trying.
Robin, do you think that this step of evaluation is something that can be bettered by governance, and is that something that you would take into account to counteract the threats that you evoked to considering weapons?
I mean, certainly with the support of the European Union, we've set up a technology watchtower at our institution, to watch and try to evaluate with limited means as much as we can some of the most concerning developments here. So clearly, we need this more systematic evaluation, and it would be wonderful if states could agree on something more institutionalized, better resourced, and more long-term than what we're trying to complement with our efforts currently. I think, I'm very much with Joshua on what he said, that kind of the arms racing of this 21st century is one for tech dominance. And that means also for us that we're not and no longer just looking at the military dimension of things. The commercial, military, scientific dimensions, they're all intertwined in very complex and difficult to disentangle ways. And I think this is something we need to come to grips with. The classical arms industry that we used to deal with has changed dramatically with all the drones and tech startups that have become involved in this kind of geopolitical endeavor. It's a whole new set of actors that is revolutionizing this industry, being involved in military, geopolitically relevant affairs. So that's something really to recognize. I would also say a more general statement. I don't think we're looking for more superheroes in this world right now. I think we're looking for something more collective and a moral authority that can guide us through all of this complexity. And I think that will be rather found in a collective effort going forward than the concentration of powers that we already see in some parts. So I would like to challenge that.
Vilas, following up on this idea of concentration of power, we talked earlier about the very idea of AI race, and you raised some concerns about this. If you want to maybe react on what has been said by your co-panelists.
Yeah. I love that. One, Robin, let me say with you, I think the whole point of superheroes is to find moral grounding in the concentration of morality, not technological power. So we're in deep agreement, right? We don't need more individuals, I promise you. We don't need more particularly hubristic men who control technology to come and tell us what the world should look like. Instead, we need absolutely that, the collective response. But the arms race is a fun one, and we're here at the Paris Peace Forum. I've heard it said so many times. I've spent the last couple of years, I've heard this term perniciously enter the public discourse, trying to get anybody to tell me what it is that we're racing towards.
AGI.
On one side, what's that?
AGI.
Well, so this is a common, and this is a good debate, I don't want to take us too far off. That is the most common response. But in a political frame, when you hear heads of state talk about the AI arms race, they're actually talking about something much more fundamental. They're talking about the concentration of economic power and political autonomy.
Yes.
And the AGI conversation is worth its own debate, but let's talk about those for a minute. Let's talk about the fact that nobody can really define to me the nexus between technological advancement and supremacy and what the end of an arms race in AI might look like. It's easy to use it as a political justification to throw hundreds of billions of dollars into building new data centers or promoting your new emergent AI model, none of which actually supports human dignity, the collective rights of people, or our common welfare, unless you buy into one single little promise, which is trust us to build all the technologies and we'll fix all your problems for you. It doesn't work for me. Let's instead ask a different question. What are we racing towards? Well, if we think of AI not merely as an outcome, but as a lever for actually creating new solutions to some really fundamental human problems, the race becomes one that's defined more by our collective possibility of defining and governing these tools, our capacity to deploy them at scale against problems that really matter for communities, our ability to bring together public resources in collaboration and cooperation with the private sector to advance these technologies down research pathways that actually lead to real and measurable outcomes for people. It's a fundamentally different frame than one that puts it into the context of we have to dominate the world, we have to compete against a few other global powers, and our companies will outperform theirs. It's a fundamentally different approach that centers human dignity and rights. It's not a popular opinion, but I'm sitting here calling for two things. One is a new form of multilateralism that creates new institutions to govern AI, and the second to reframe a technological debate into one about a shared vision of what the future looks like. And if it's unpopular, I think the people in this room might also maybe support it.
I'm turning to Yoshua Bengio. Do you think the conversation should focus, as you said it, on AGI when we talk about this race?
So, you know, call it whatever you want, but the data is very clear that capabilities of AI are on the rise and on some metrics exponentially fast. So, and by the way, it's called jagged. In other words, AIs can be very good at some things and really bad at other things, but it's all going up. And there will be transformative consequences for politics, the economy, national security. We can't just say, let's do the right thing. Yes, I mean, a large part of my research is about AI for good and AI applied in medicine and climate and so on. But I'm worried that it will also be used as a tool of domination. And the people who have the most money and power right now, that is their stated goal. So we can't just hope for the best, and we do need to have multilateral institutions. But what's going to be your lever when the power is not in your hand? I mean, what if the countries that control that power don't care about multilateral institutions? What is going to be, you know, what do we do?
If I may, speaking with my old hat as a regulator, not all regulators have equal access to levers in this space. You know, and I think we must be frank here. This is one of the challenges of dealing in a space now that does not have the same geographic boundaries that we have for most regulatory challenges. So if I, as a Prime Minister, decide that smoking is doing harm to my nation and we need to do something to mitigate against those harms, I've got a number of tools that I can use. And yes, I will come under, you know, significant pressure from lobbyists and commercial interests, but I still have a defined set of tools and a way to impact that issue within my own boundaries. With an issue of this nature, even if I hold the moral view that we need guardrails to be put in place, certain limitations, checks and balances, what are the tools that I have available to me when it is very easy to present as a point of pressure from those who are developing this technology? Well, if you put those limitations on, then New Zealand will, to use the example, suffer economically as a consequence, because we will either withdraw service or there'll be some kind of limitation to what your domestic population is able to access because you are asking questions that we do not wish to answer or embed into our development. And so that means your level of influence as that individual nation not only is limited, it almost doesn't exist, because actually the way to deal with you is to exclude you. And I say that based on, we've seen the threats that have been used in other areas where we've seen rapid technological advancement, where the end goal is either to be first, or market dominance, or just commercial imperative. And so that lends itself to countries having to work together. But let's not be naive. There are those who just hold greater sway and weight than others. And if, as you say, they are not interested in regulating or not interested in guardrails, where does that lead us? I don't want to be someone who leads us down to a conversation that has no endpoint, though, or no hope attached to it, because I'm an optimist by nature, but in this debate, I'm a pragmatist. I think one of the points of disruption here is to end the idea that it's a zero-sum game, because what governments are being told in particular is you can't have the pros without the cons. So if you try and limit the cons, you won't get any pro. Yoshua has a proposition which challenges that it can be pro-pro. It isn't true that you have to limit your access and diffusion and your economic gain. There are ways to put in these limitations that means that we can have these protections, but also the advancement. So I really lean into the technologists and the experts who are disrupting some of the narratives that regulators are coming up against. And so I don't know, Yoshua, if you want to speak to the notion that this is not a zero-sum game. Absolutely.
Right now, because of the race, because of the commercial pressure, there's not enough effort in developing the sort of thing that I'm working on with a new nonprofit called LawZero. That is, how do we change, using the same toolbox that exists right now in AI, how do we build systems that will both have technical guardrails, will enable societal guardrails, and will be capable, so will also allow the leverage that you're worried about. I think economically, if we're prisoners of a few systems, very advanced systems in a few years, then we don't have a voice around the table of these moral questions. But the technology can be developed in the direction that will empower us, allow us to develop AI and be ethical and aligned with our democratic values. It's a false belief. And I would also connect to all of the, I think, incorrect stories about, it's innovation or regulation. I've been part of the, chairing some of the efforts on the Code of Practice for the AI Act. And most of the companies around the world have signed up, because really what we're asking is not much more than what they were already doing, at least the good ones. And it's just more transparency and more visibility for the state. So there is a way to regulate in a way that does not impose a burden. It doesn't apply to the startups and the small companies. There's just a lot of disinformation about this, which needs to be corrected. But it's part of this bigger idea that we can have systems that are human aligned and useful for the benefits that many people are seeking from AI.
Nicolas, if you want to...
Yeah, I just wanted to come in because Yoshua and I were bonding over, we talked last time about the EU General Purpose AI Code of Practice that Yoshua chaired, one of the working groups on security. And I have to say, really led the idea of providing input, not just from industry, but also civil society to help improve it. And I was teasing him last time we met in February. Here are some of the things that we would like to see improve. We're committed to do this. Microsoft signed up ahead of the release to the voluntary code of practice. And I actually have to say, Yoshua and the team listened and took the expert interjections and feedback seriously. And I think it got better for it. And I think we're more secure because of that. And I think that's really critical. I think the second bit is, I agree with Robin in terms of the hero side. We need less Batman and we need more K-pop demon hunters. This is a team sport. We're not going to get it right if it's sort of a lone wolf go at it. Microsoft are not going to do it. We're certainly no hero, but we want to be part of a team who are all committed to trust, who are all committed to get this better. I think that's critical.
And having a level playing field for all the companies developing advanced AI, I think is good for companies like Microsoft. But if there is no rules, then it's the bad guys that are winning.
We saw over the past few years international AI summits, the first one in Bletchley Park, focusing on AI safety. Then France hosted the next edition based on, it was the AI Action Summit, so a more positive view on AI, and India is taking a similar path for its summit next year. Is there still a place in the international conversation to talk about the security aspects that we are discussing today? Maybe Vilas, if you have a thought on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Two thoughts. So one, absolutely security is right at the heart of it. But what we've done, I think, in a meaningful way is move the conversation from a very specific view of a form of existential risk and safety to something that's much more grounded in our lived human experience. I think a couple of things that have come out of it. One is the work that we're doing around collaborating with cybersecurity authorities all around the world to bring them together into a mechanism where as the accelerating adversarial capacity leads to increased attacks, we have more robust forms of information sharing, of algorithmic design and capacity that's being shared among the defensive mechanisms of cybersecurity. I think that'll feature very well at the summit. The second thing I'll say is, and it goes back to some of the comments here, which I wholeheartedly agree with, if you find that you don't have leverage to meaningfully influence the conversation, to me the answer to that has been go figure out how to create it. For us, two of the solutions to that have been, one, creating a new mechanism for public financing capacity to identify and support these alternative pathways we're talking about. From Yoshua's nonprofit to the many organizations that are working on this that are generally capital starved. We put $500 million in capital on the table in the last 5 years through the foundation and through consortiums that we're building like Current AI, which was announced at the Paris Summit, an aspiration to turn that into billions of dollars. That's money that'll go into, sure, the typical civil society work of supporting victims and harm, but also to invest deeply in building a new form of capacity around technological creation, to support the creation of low-cost edge models, to build use cases that support public use, to actually invest in security and governance as a function of a public purpose rather than a technological outcome. We have to do that in India. I think we'll see that, and the second part of this will be the focus on impact. Again, whoever's hosting, I think the world is moving into one particular direction, which is you can build the most advanced emergent frontier model you want, but if there's not an application layer that translates that capacity into meaningful outcomes, with governance built in, with guardrails built in, with a societally informed focus on what we're actually creating, it's just a model that sits in the cloud and is fun to talk about. The AI Impact Summit in India, I think, will really focus on how we build the social infrastructure of building AI at scale and investing in those applications that connect to direct populations, support their challenges, and give us a sandbox to actually test these ideas about governance in enterprise scale implementation that hopefully can be owned at least partly by public institutions in the public sector.
Robin, you raised an array of issues in your field with AI. Can it be also part of the solution if you want to have a more optimistic view on this?
Oh, you know, certainly, I mean, the geopolitical state of affairs is currently rather bleak, but of course the high top-notch security issues have often also been a starting point to revive discussions because there the pressure is the highest. This is existential risks. And, you know, of course we can, it's just my job not to talk so much about the benefits, which are huge, and I would much rather talk about the positive vision we can pursue, but it lies in the nature of my job that we focus on these specific threats. And let me just say on the arms racing or whatever, we can discuss the term, tech dominance race, there is the AGI dimension of it, that's a big one. There is the general layer of uncertainty around it, that even though this is a room full of high-level experts, none of us is really fully aware of all the developments and scientific things that are currently ongoing. We are all in the sandbox, in a sense. This is a real-time kind of field experience of how AI is going to play out on lots of issues, not just, you know, militarized issues where we focus on. I was reading this morning that millions of people share psychological issues, medical issues with ChatGPT. Where is that going to lead us? This is just another facet of a very, very big debate. But I give you one very hands-on example for arms racing. I go to panels around the world, obviously, with this job. And what I've heard very often is that people from all walks of life will say, well, even if we could agree to stop the integration of AI into military operations, let's say at level 5. In the current polarized world, we just fear the enemy will go to level 6 and will outpace us. Therefore, we're not stopping at level 5. And that means currently everyone is in a kind of mindset to go all in and all out. And this is what I meant when I said, where is this speed bump self-restraint going to come from? You know, just one more point. Article 1 of the Geneva Conventions, right after the Second World War, it says Geneva Conventions have to be respected in all circumstances. And the great achievement there was, it meant even if the enemy goes much lower, you stick to the Geneva Conventions. And this fundamental insight, very basic insight, that seems to be increasingly lost, and we're very tech-driven in this sense.
I want to follow up on what you're saying because I'm very worried that as AI becomes more, capable intellectually, it's going to give a lot of power, including military power, to those who control it. And so this race is, as I said, very dangerous. So you might ask, so what, is there any hope? And so long as AI is used as a dominance tool and we ignore the catastrophic risks that will come from it, then yeah, there's no escape. But if the leading governments in charge of the most advanced AI systems understand the catastrophic risks, the terrorists, the loss of control, where we're all in the same boat, right? So it doesn't matter if you're Chinese or American. If somebody releases a new pandemic that kills 1 billion people, we all lose, right? And so once these governments understand the level of threat, the only option is, okay, so we don't trust each other, but we also need to find a way to avoid these things. And I think there are ways to avoid these things, and it's going to become a multilateral discussion.
Just to climb in there, back to that, the original foundation for the work that we did in the Christchurch call, again, crisis and consensus. I think we make a big assumption when we talk about the polarized world we're in, which undoubtedly we are, and which is undoubtedly disrupting multilateral infrastructure that we've relied upon for decades. But I do think we are making a little bit of an assumption that polarization means that the commercial imperatives and the race means that we are foregoing that conversation that potentially may be able to have about protecting our shared humanity, about removing some of the existential threat that exists with this rapid technological development. When actually there will be, I am sure, consensus, surely, around ensuring future pandemics aren't enabled, that we don't lose control over nuclear weaponry, that there will be some shared view that, hey, that's not in the interests of China and it's not in the interests of the United States either. So rather than making these assumptions, I do think that conversation needs to be had. I think it needs to be the starting point for some of the, yes, it is at that higher level, and we actually need guardrails coming all the way down through the system, but at least it would be a starting point for conversation. I say that coming from a nation who has never been a fan of the tool of mutually reassured destruction. We've never viewed the fact that we're all safer if we all just happen to have our finger on a nuclear weapon. I don't think that should be the frame and mindset here in this space, but let's not make the assumption that the conversation can't be had. I hear sometimes I'm not accusing you of doing that, by the way. I think that there are some policymakers that make it. I hear that there are, at some level, these discussions being had. I think there needs to be more of it, and I think it needs to be endorsed at leader level.
We have a few minutes for questions from the public. So some microphones will be circulated if you want to raise your hands if you have questions, and we will just take questions and not remarks, please.
You hear me? Okay. Thank you very much for your intervention. We often talk about the brutalization of war, maybe the AI, maybe a turning point of it. Do you think the use of AI, the misuse of AI could induce a brutalization and a dehumanization of warfare and also international and internal affairs? Thank you very much.
I think that's for you, Orbin.
I mean, just to say, we talk so much about new technologies. We're seeing mass violence against civilians from very crude old technologies in many places in this world currently, which is the most acute concern probably in that regard. But of course, abuses, misuses of AI could lead in that direction in the long term. But also currently, I'm more concerned of new technology meets kind of old technology. This is what is probably much more imminent, that we see commercially available drones, but they're dropping explosives, which is a rather crude way of going about in warfare. We could in the future, I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but you ask for it, we could see agricultural spraying drones being misused to spray all sorts of chemical toxins. This, is not rocket science and not so far away as some of the the abuses of AI in the future, probably.
Another question?
I have the mic.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Interesting conversation. My biggest one is I've not heard the conversation towards the global south, the global south, which is the largest part of our globe. Yeah, I mean, Professor Yoshua, we are evaluating some of your work. Last we've seen some of your work, but I'd love to hear. Yes, a lot of global south moderators are looking at this content and training models, but when you flip it, what is the lack of global south interaction or contribution to this conversation, meaning to what he's just said, weaponization of AI? Do our governments actually understand this? What are we doing towards that? Thank you.
Either of you, if you want to begin.
I mean, I'm happy to jump in. A couple of things. So one is much of our work is about the global south, as you well know, right? And what that means is building this alternate view of technological capacity that sits outside of the traditionally dominant markets. I think in many of my answers today, I've been surprised. I think maybe I sound like the optimist in the room. I'll always own the title. I love being an optimist. But my life's work has been turning optimism into practice. When we think about the global south, we know the incredible capacity that exists there already. The talent base, the incredible innovation. What's missing is in many ways because of tightly held control, access to the fundamental and foundational resources required to build a meaningful AI capacity. There are two ways to handle that. One is through the work of policy and multilateralism of regulators to break open some of those constructs and let people have access. There, I'll be honest with you, I don't have much hope. The second is to build that capacity at scale by moving resources in, to do things like the work of UNESCO that has built the readiness assessment methodology in 80 countries around the world to work with governments to build that very capacity you described, to make sure the governments know what's happening, they know what their plans can be, and they know how to invest in public infrastructure that lets people come forward and innovate for scale. The second is the idea of transforming the conversation about AI from continuing to invest in the best and most brilliant model to the application layer that transforms people's lives. And you've heard me talk about that a little bit today. To move public capital and resources to build that innovation ecosystem at scale. And the third, and I know, Shiko, you're a champion for this, as so many in this room are, the fact that we have panels like this that continually exist that are primarily global north actors from large companies and large institutions who have fiscal capital and very little in the way of actually opening up the table to bring that voice into these conversations. That's a common commitment we can make to change the way those conversations happen.
Can I come at it this again from the perspective, I guess, of having tried to create an institution and a framework that thinks about how we disperse decision-making more evenly and influence more evenly. Because every time I hear the conversation about AI in the global south, it tends to be from the point of diffusion and how do we ensure equitable access to the benefits of AI. I'm interested in how we spread equitable access to power, influence, and decision-making. And we absolutely do not have that presently. So that's why I'm really interested in how we build decision-making bodies and the ability for, governments to actually make decisions in the interests of their citizens in a way that they can't do now. Actually, even if you wanted to put in a layer of protection or expectation that, AI be deployed in your nation in a particular way, you can't. Not readily. And so I'm interested again in how do we apply the mindset of those multilateral institutions to allow power and decision making into the global south on these tools as well.
I want to add something to this. What are the levers of the global south, right? In this world where AI might be used as a tool of dominance, right? Besides being the victim. And if we go back to the scenario I was talking about, where, say, the US and China understand that the stakes are very high if they don't agree on something to manage globally those risks. Well, globally means it's not just the US and China's companies that have to follow some rules. They will also want to make sure that every country on Earth, just like we do for nuclear, is not being reckless about AI. And then these other countries who don't own these big models? Well, they can say yes or no, right? And that's a card that is actually important, not right now, but will be if AI continues to grow in its capabilities. And the exchange here is, yes, we'll do the right moral things with AI, we'll regulate whatever is needed, but we also want to have a voice in how AI is developed. We want to be part of the decision process. We want access to the benefits, to the scientific advances in medicine and climate and everything else that is promised. We want to make sure AI is not just developed for this commercial competition, but also for the benefit of all of humanity.
If I may take the lesson,
Yeah.
let's take the
Time is
lesson of
running
nuclear
out, so-
weapons, predominantly held by the global north, predominantly tested in the global south. I think we would do well to remember that.
If you want to add a...
Yeah, I just thank you for raising that point and bringing that perspective. I think it's really critical, and I agree with Jacinda and Joshua. Actually, Microsoft have done some work with Unidir to try to bring more voices from Global South into the conversation, specifically around use of AI for security and national security responsibly. And I think the second point I would make is also we need to make sure that the basics are there, that we have energy to support it, that we have telco infrastructure to support the conversation around AI and not just go immediate to the highest end use. But I also think AI, and I want to end on a positive note, has a lot of potential here to do this. Two specific examples. So the majority of cybersecurity attacks that have devastating impact, particularly in the global south, are around fraud and are around critical infrastructure. And they are particularly using known unpatched vulnerabilities in open source software and operational technology. AI has tremendous potential to change that, to identify, remediate those vulnerabilities, and do that at a very low cost. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we need to continue to have those conversations. We need to have more voices on this. So like for us, this has been a pleasure to have the conversation with all of you. I appreciate the question. I appreciate the perspectives. Know that we remain committed to engaging as many and as diverse voices around this. And I agree, not just in the how can we accelerate AI diffusion with vision and caution, but also make sure that we have debates around who gets to be in the room for those decisions. Thank you.
We'll take one last very short question, please.
Voilà. Je vais poser ma question en français.
I'd like to ask my question in French. Last week there was a call signed by 25 leaders in the world, including the creators of AI. They called for stopping super AI, until which point we have agreed on the rules around this super intelligence. So I'm wondering, is it possible to stop this race in its tracks? And can we really agree on common rules?
This, so maybe I'll say a few words. So first of all, superintelligence isn't around the corner, right? We're talking about if AI capabilities continue on their current path, in some number of years, maybe decades, we don't know, we would be building machines that are substantially smarter than us in many ways. And that creates so many unknowns and risks that the right thing to do, and just like every human's interest should be, to make sure that we manage those risks, that we try to get the benefits, and we don't do crazy stuff that risks everyone's future. But of course, that's not going to happen in the current political, say, frame. And so we have to start that conversation now. Even if it is about something in 10 years from now, we need to start a conversation. We need to make sure that the leaders of countries around the world understand that we're not talking about the current AI. We're talking about something that's hypothetical, but that even if it was only a 1% chance that it would be achieved, could be highly destructive or highly useful, but at a scale that we don't even imagine for the most part right now. So that's it. It's about, we need a consensus both scientifically and in terms of social acceptance of exactly what we do, how we do it, so that we don't risk our future stupidly.
But the way that we get there, Joshua, is that we build it on stepping stones day by day, right? Like the conversation around AGI is challenging, is interesting. We are certainly part of it. But for me, very real threat actors are using AI today. There are communities that are not part of the conversation today. And so for me, in terms of focus, taking a pragmatic approach is trying our best to solve those step by step, and then hopefully that will build the capacity for the important work that's being done to solve the really thorny issues as well.
Thank you so much for all your inputs in this great panel. Time is running out, so thank you all for listening, and have a good day.